We've been talking about net zero, but and some socio-technical transition issues, etc. But under net zero itself, one has to consider the human values as we keep boldly planning and depending on technological promises of carbon capture and bioenergy and so on for projecting into the future to say when and how we will hit net zero. We are not being so careful about the human dimensions, the behavioral aspects and intrinsic and extrinsic values at individual levels. There are community level cultural values, norms, punishments, which are all going to decide how people perceive various technologies and how they get assimilated, accepted, etc. So this is a schematic showing the dimensions of net zero energy systems, which we talked about, net zero energy systems. So you have the various fossil fuel based energy systems which we are so used to. We are now getting used to electric vehicles and charging systems. We are used to now seeing windmills around, solar panels around, and we will begin to obviously we have been seeing the recycling aspects for a long time. We are used to the hydro and all the things that we value, like greenery, the public transport system, and what we like in terms of freedom and what we like in terms of our neighborhoods, our foods, and our preferences, and each one has a bearing on net zero. And changing preferences, for example, reducing meat to be more carbon friendly or reducing your carbon footprint, etc., are not necessarily directly and easily acceptable for all. Recycling has issues in terms of whether many things that are sold to you as being recyclable are actually recyclable at all, and so on and so forth. In a simple way, the examples of behaviors that can significantly contribute to achieving net zero energy systems can be looked at here from this paper. It's a nice paper that I'm just summarizing very briefly. So look at various sectors like mobility, how to reduce energy demand, shift to low and zero carbon alternatives, and match energy demand and supply. So obviously the behaviors that can significantly contribute to achieving net zero include living car free, reducing air travel, active transport for short distance like walking and cycling, reducing leisure trips. So this you begin to get into personal preferences. It's one thing to say walk and cycle at short distances, but it is another thing to say reduce your vacation trips, leisure trips, because that may have beneficial effect on your mental state, on your stress level, on how to deal with your stress at work or home or whatever else. And own smaller cars and more efficient combustion engines. So if we want to go away from the carbon trap and decarbonize, then obviously more efficient combustion engines is not the way to go. We have to switch to electric vehicles, for example, but the system has to provide them as well. Fuel efficient driving, so to choose your the mode of driving, your style, keeping the tire pressure correct, and so on and so forth. Low carbon materials for car manufacture, that's not in your hand, but that can affect the outcome. Shift to low and zero carbon alternatives like electric vehicles or alternative fuels like hydrogen and biofuels. We looked in another podcast about how hydrogen is having trouble in terms of hydrogen cars. Many people have said they are already dead and buried, but many people think there is still hope in terms of green hydrogen and that the hydrogen revolution is coming. And of course public transport we have discussed in many contexts, but this again is not a preferred option for everybody, and it's not always convenient, even if it is a preferred option in many places, suburban US, for example. Matching energy demand and supply, you have smart charging of electric vehicles when renewable energy is available to be one of the key needs if you do switch to electric vehicles, and of course using electric vehicles as batteries. So when you are parked, can you then either put the energy back to the grid or use that battery for use at home instead of using just for driving around. In the housing, similarly, you have refurbishing and renovating homes, for example, insulated glazing, walls, roofs, energy passive or energy positive homes, less living space, so you have to live in smaller places. How many people would want to do that? Low carbon building materials, many are becoming available, but this has a long way to go, especially when it comes to steel and cement. Adopting and using energy efficient home appliances depends on the cost and return on investments. Curtailing everyday energy use, for example, lowering room temperature, saving hot water, reducing laundry temperatures, line drying laundry, eliminating standby electricity use. So all of these often are related to externalities that have nothing to do with energy efficiency. Like, you cannot always hang your laundry outside. In some neighborhoods they are considered not aesthetically pleasing, and some people like to keep room temperature very low but then wear sweatpants and sweatshirt or use blankets to sleep, because in fact you can sleep a little better. At least I can sleep better when temperatures are cold. But these are some choices. Some of them are no regret decisions, some require behavioral changes or accepting some discomfort, if you would. In terms of shift to low and zero carbon alternatives, you have producing own renewable energy, like installing PVs and heat pumps. Purchase renewable energy, for example, choose a green energy provider, buying shares in renewable energy products. You may not always have this choice of choosing energy provider, and in your retirement account you may not have the option of choosing certain things unless you do it as a group. Renewable based cooling and heating and LED lighting. And of course then you have to look at matching energy demand and supply in terms of adopt and use energy storage technologies, for example batteries, electric vehicles. Shift energy use, so operating appliances to times when renewable energy production is high, so during the daytime, either manually or with automated technology. For example, peer-to-peer trading of electricity to balance out the energy demand. So we talked about time of use for charging EVs, which can reduce utility bills for all. And in the food, you have plant-based diet, reducing consumption of meat and dairy goes into personal choices and incentivizing those changes. Energy efficient cooking methods and cookware, reducing the overall food intake, avoid food waste. And then you can choose organic, seasonal, local products, low carbon meats, alternative fuels for cooking, improved cook stoves and cookware. Again, there are cultural issues of how food tastes when you use a solar heater versus a biomass burning stove with the smoke and the smoky flavor, etc. To match supply and demand, shifting cooking times according to availability of renewable energy. Is this always possible? If the woman is working or cannot afford to cook according to energy availability, then that's not a good choice. There are other things like circular economy, reducing waste, shared products and services, so food sharing, community cooking, carpooling, car sharing, co-housing, refurbished products, choose second-hand products, adopt multi-purpose appliances that enable provision of more services with less resources, recycle materials. For example, there is a big push now to say everybody wants to buy new clothes, but can we somehow mentally switch to buying second-hand clothes? This is becoming bigger and bigger, but again, people who choose it has to go, grow much larger than it is now. In terms of citizenship behavior, support low zero carbon actions through civic channels, for example product choice, voting and protesting. Protesting for things comes under intrinsic and extrinsic values. Some people may care about them, some people may not care about them enough to go and protest. For example, behaviors with relatively high carbon reduction potential are marked here in bold. Decarbonization potential of alternative fuels varies due to possible side effects such as land use for biofuel crops. The other point, footnote to be noted, except when growing local products, example in greenhouses, take more energy than shipping products from elsewhere, takes more energy. Okay, so examples of implications of net zero energy systems for people's values, you can think of this pie chart: altruistic, biospheric, hedonic, and egoistic. So this is for others and this is for oneself. So again, it's intrinsic and extrinsic kind of situation. Consequences for other people, for example, costs, health effects, access to clean and affordable energy, fairness of distribution of costs and benefits between groups, consequences of for future generations. These come under altruistic behaviors, but we have discussed elsewhere that altruistic behavior tends to be religion based on moral stories and allegories told to you when you're growing up. So it's kind of a trained behavior which can be acquired, which means it can also be lost, or can be abandoned when push comes to shove, or when there are resource limitations, or when you don't feel like worrying about consequences for other people. Under biospheric, worrying about others, combating climate change, effects on ecosystems and environmental pollution. So each time when you drive, are you worrying about environmental pollutions? When you travel, are you worrying about if you're using biofuel or not? Are you worrying about effects on ecosystems and combating climate change? Can one even track everything all day, every day? When the system is in a carbon trap, then many times you don't even have a choice, right? Under hedonic, so on the personal side, comfort, pleasant home temperatures are something we all like. Convenience, for example, easiness of adopting, operating and maintaining technology becomes a big handicap. If you like iPhone, you want to buy iPhone, you don't care how much carbon footprint it has, you just like it as a convenient device that you like. Enjoyment, for example, having fun, tasty food, so you like meat, you like traveling, you like leisure travel, etc. Then that's hedonic, and yet it's for oneself, but it can be detrimental to things that are important when we consider others. On the egoistic side, monetary costs and benefits tend to be considerations: property values, energy independence, autonomy and control, privacy, personal health, personal access to energy, and so on. Obviously, these are not comprehensive, but examples of how things map out. In terms of examples of 4 varying national energy cultures, this is where we're getting into behavioral aspects related to cultures, but even there you cannot say India, because India has many cultures. It's a big country with many diverse languages, populations and preferences compared to, let's say, Denmark. And China is similarly large, more of a common language than India, but still cultures are very different in the south versus the north, east, west. Russia is more homogeneous than others, but maybe more diverse than Denmark, for example. So you have to worry about overall characterization, low carbon emission, dependence on fossil fuel exports, fossil fuel mix in total primary energy supply, institutional commitment to liberal democracy, engagement with intergovernmental environmental agreements. Okay, so think of India, energy access focused. So India wants to grow economically, and it's not energy independent because it has limited resources. So it will burn coal if it wants to grow economically and not necessarily worry about net zero. Under low carbon, India would like strong policies aligned with global temperature rise of less than 2 degrees C. So it's committed to NDC. It has submitted its NDCs. It has revised them. According to some metrics, it gets good scores. According to some others, it gets poor scores, and so on. Moderate dependence on fossil fuel exports at 12%, fossil fuel mix high at 75%, but shifting to increased dependence on imports. Moderate with some commitments to good governance, governance, but still a focus on domestic challenges when it comes to international commitments to liberal democracy. In terms of engagement with international environmental agreements, moderate, supplemented with fairly ambitious nationally developed contributions, as I mentioned, under the Paris Agreement. On the other hand, Denmark, for example, proactive innovation and leadership. It's a rich country, small homogeneous population, so its expectations and behaviors and commitments and strategies, policies, everything will be different. Low carbon emissions, low carbon ambition, fairly strong policies aligned with less than 3 degrees, low at 4%. This is dependence on fossil fuel exports. Fossil fuel mix moderate at 64%, but declining as fossil fuels are phased out. But as you know, as Russian war turned off the gas supply, then Denmark also is considering firing up some coal plants, so you have to be always careful about that. It has strong, although backed by a strong taxation regime and high levels of wealth when it comes to institutional commitment to liberal democracy, so it's one of the highest taxes, and it's a very expensive country as well. So it's rich, people live there, they can afford it, but for outsiders it's just impossibly expensive. In terms of international environmental agreements, Denmark is strong, with Denmark known as a regional and global environmental leader. So you have similar things to compare for Russia and China, but you get the sense of what we are looking at. In terms of design principles for understanding and addressing the human dimensions of net zero systems, prioritize high impact behaviors, target key antecedents of behaviors. So under prioritizing high impact behaviors, of course, you have target carbon rich behaviors such as individual car use, meat consumption, home heating and cooling. Aim for highest gains in carbon reduction such as efficiency over curtailment. So incentivize by providing efficient appliances and cars and heat pumps or whatever else. Consider the human dimensions of technological solutions, for example, renewable energy sources, electric vehicles. People need to accept the technology and change their behavior accordingly. Example, matching energy demand to renewable energy supply. Time of use has to depend on that. Not always possible, but it can be prioritized in some way through incentives. In terms of targeting key antecedent behaviors, the baggages we carry, knowledge is important but often not enough to change behavior. People are aware, they seek information about climate change, they may be worried, but doesn't mean that behavior necessarily changes, or there will be one action bias where you buy a hybrid car and you think you've done your part and then you don't care about energy efficiency of appliances or your meat consumption, travel time, travel amount, etc., etc. Multiple motives encourage low carbon actions, strengthen people's intrinsic motivation to act, for example, emphasize environmental benefits, support social interactions. These are kind of changes that are hard to design as promoters of behavioral change. Remove contextual barriers for low carbon behaviors, for example, reduce costs, provide infrastructure for favoring getting rid of antecedent behaviors. Target factors influencing public acceptability of policies and system changes include improve overall sustainability of net zero systems by considering impacts on other sustainability goals, for example, food security, land use by local communities. Consider various costs and benefits, fair distribution of costs and benefits, fair decision making, and trust in key actors. People who are ordering should have legitimacy, salience, and credibility. There is no one-fits-all solution. Take regional and cultural aspects into account. So for a country like India, for example, each state is very different and each region has some commonalities and some major differences, etc. Incorporate the social sciences early. Natural science is, of course, all about the modeling, predictions, projections of climate change, but actual implementations are all social sciences. The social sciences provide critical insights into how to develop technologies, policies, and system changes that are acceptable and get adopted by the public. Incorporating the social sciences early in the design process prevents public resistance towards the already made top-down implemented technologies, policies, and system changes. Okay, it's kind of a brief introduction, but I think it's very useful in terms of considering human behaviors and human dimensions of net zero transitions, socio-technical transitions in terms of transportation, energy systems, energy use, adapting behavioral changes in terms of travel, when to use energy for cooking and other things, etc. So let's see how these things evolve. As we said, knowledge doesn't necessarily, or awareness doesn't necessarily mean environmental change. So many climate scientists who think they are doing climate communication often are not careful about what is the purpose of their communication effort. Is it for awareness? Is it to get people involved in actions, or is it to bring about behavioral change? They cannot all be the same. They tend to be, they need to be done differently depending on what you're trying to accomplish. So that has to be kept in mind as well, in terms of who's giving the message and why they are giving the message and how it relates to human dimensions of net zero. Okay.